Listen to the show for long enough, you'll know that Nqobile is never shy to speak his mind. He's been on the show before. He's written a letter that he believes every single person, especially black people, should listen to. Where do you want to start with this, dude? Unmute your microphone and give us your diatribe. Go wild. What's happening?
Oh, morning, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity again. Gareth, I think just following it in order as per the letter goes, I think it's important to start from the beginning and going down because as you can see, I was trying to go for a theme of small and then go into the where the root of the issue start because the whole letter I know this because when I've spoken to my fellow, black kin, people that I know that know me, many
Yeah.
of them have actually resisted what I've written to you, right? Due to the fact that it requires a lot of self-reflection and self-introspection in a sense of you need to now really dive in as in if things have been like this for black people for eon or let's say hundreds of years, okay, for this history, we now need to actually go even deeper and see how come the black experience is always perpetuated up as in this is a victim. So that's my issue as in I've noticed other cultures or races, whatever you want to use, term you use, is that the ones that really prosper, because you can look at racial groups and see that they all prosper. The ones that prosper don't have a victim mentality as a racial group, but the ones that do suffer have a victim mindset as a group.
All right, Nqobile, just to put this in context, the reason that you decided to write this, and I mean, I hope someone publishes it somewhere, but I'm happy to put it up on cliffcentral.com because we're going to get so many people who disagree and so many people who agree. The reason you brought this up now and why it's relevant now is because of the Black Lives Matter movement. So just tell us, first of all, what you think of Black Lives Matter, because I don't think there's very much disagreement on the origins of this particular protest in America and that's spread all over the world, that no one in the world is for police brutality. I mean, that's obvious, but it has taken on, and I mean, it's in the name, Black Lives Matter, that it's taken on this kind of racial character, and that it's become, for a lot of people who are not black and in America, it's become a very emotional issue for even like white people and Asian people and Australians. It's weird how this thing has caught fire all over the world. So do you want to talk about how it affected you and what you're thinking of that movement at the moment?
Yeah. So my main problem, right, is that we as black people have been I grew up obviously being told, and I remember this as a child. I grew up fearing a white person. I had this mentality growing up in the townships, as always hearing about the white man and the white family and how they are this and that. And when I first interacted with white people, I was scared as a black person. I really was. I was like, I don't want these people near me because of what I've heard. And when I heard that they were abusive to my people back in apartheid, it made me angry and scared at the same time whenever I dealt with the white people because of the media and how they perpetuate this black narrative of victimhood and you need help.
Where did you grow up? Where did you grow up again? Just remind us.
Okay, I grew up around Durban, basically in Mlazi, and then I stayed at a township called Elovu. So that's where about the majority of my life I would have spent it, actually. Yeah, before I moved to the suburbs.
But all right. So you think that this kind of mentality is indoctrinated and engendered in people when they're young? I mean, Pumi brought it up on Tuesday. I don't know if you heard that, but she said, it's kind of like if you don't trust an animal. I mean, it's an interesting comparison to make, and I've got a lot of feedback from people who disagree with Pumi, by the way. But she says if she knows that a dog is not going to bite her, her reaction's different, but she always meets a dog thinking it's going to bite her. That resonated with you.
Yeah, exactly like what Pumi was mentioning, because now going to Black Lives Matter. Okay, fast forwarding to now, because Black Lives Matter is a rehash of what has already happened in the past. Okay, I think Reverend Al Sharpton in them in America in context, for example. In South African context, you can say now it's Julius Malema in them, right? But what you need to look is who. There's one independent journalist who I love, who's taught me a lot in how to investigate sources of conflicts in the media stuff. As in, always go for financial reasons first. As in, try that financial angle. So if you look at Black Lives Matter's financial angle, as in who funds them, why do they keep on popping up, why is the media giving them the narrative that they want, and why is it that Black Lives Matter always targets white-related issues on racism and never black on black, for example? Because in America, using American context, it is factually proven, and people always mention the PNET surveys, and that Black people are more likely to enter to cop, but they don't take into consideration that Black people kill more Black people than white people kill Blacks. That's a fact, hands down. So if Black Lives Matter, why don't you also raise that when, for example, in Chicago had the deadliest weekend ever earlier this year? Why don't you go and march? No, you don't. But when a white cop kills a Black person, for that, they basically go jump at it quickly and Shelton is there to make money out of it.
I kind of sympathize with you, because I do think there are more voices that are supporting the narrative which we hear from everybody else. And I think, voices like yours that are taking up a different narrative don't get very much support. And maybe that's because the other narrative doesn't like contradiction. And it's
a money-making scheme, because if you think about it, and I like that Ben Shapiro also mentioned this.
But it's also because, like, if you keep Black people busy, let's say you are a racist, okay? And if you keep Black people busy with Black Lives Matter and, complaining about colonialism and imperialism and white supremacy, and those people are not able to spend that time productively. So you're keeping them in a state of fury and anger and rage, sometimes justified. I'm more than willing to accept that a lot of people have good reasons to be pissed off, right? But if they're busy with all that shit, they can't get ahead. Because I know if I'm not focused on my work, if I can't get on with what I need to do, not only to earn money, but to grow my circle of friends, to interact with people who add value to my life, if I'm caught up in my own bullshit, which happens to me a lot of the time, that is not productive time. And if you were a racist, this would be a great way to trap Black people in a perpetual cycle of getting nothing done except being cross. And while I don't disregard that some of these movements have freed people and have liberated thought and have created ideas and have done amazing things, for most of the participants, it's keeping them locked in something which is not going to make their lives better.
Yes, exactly that, Gareth. As in, if you actually look at the root of reason Black people actually suffer, and then they attribute it to systematic racism or white monopoly capital in South African context, actually, then you realize that actually we had, like you're mentioning now, we have been misdirected into irrelevant issues, or should I say irrelevant symptoms, because these so-called systematic racial stuff that they point out, in my view, it's a symptom of the real disease. Now,
if you were against white monopoly capital, for example, and you bought one share in every South African company, you could go to every AGM and you could make a statement. But that's work. That's way too much work. And you know what? You're not going to get attention for it. So instead, it's easier to just take to the streets and get on a knee, for example, like the EFF did this week. But if you are an actual shareholder in 10 South African companies and you take an interest in them, you don't have to own the majority share. Who cares about whether it's the majority or the minority share? Jeff Bezos owns the most of Amazon. There's still lots of people who go to those AGMs and make their voices heard. Why wouldn't you want to share in something that's growing? Because it's easier to complain about things you're not part of.
It's Marxist. It is definitely Marxist ideology. Because I used to always wonder when Jordan Peterson would bring this up in these debates, when he used to debate all these other guys who were for Black Lives Matter and stuff. But the thing is, it's too too much work and it's too much painful, and it requires you to actually go, you know what, I have to take responsibility for my own action. Because I always tell my black people, or my black friends, or whoever, even my own family who I argue with in this point, where I say, guys, what Asians have had the same suffering as us. Actually, if you historically accurately look at it, Asians suffered. But within 100 years, basically, in my view, one generation of Asians, they are now far superior than, you could say, the white people. But I haven't heard this terminology of white monopoly capital with Asians or Jews, for example. Like these types of groups of races have overcome adversity, but yet we as black people
I wonder why we don't talk a lot about the Indian slave trade that was farming our sugar plantations in KwaZulu-Natal, where you and C are from. Why that isn't, like, you don't have Indian people really bringing up that they might have come here as slaves without any say in the matter. Like African Americans have that argument, for example. In America, we were taken away as slaves, and it's a hideous story, don't get me wrong. But it's a story that has long-reaching consequences, and we still have people today talking about the slave trade. And yet it's not like part of when I meet some dude from Lenasia or from Laudium here in Pretoria. And we don't start off like, oh, my ancestors were brought here to cut sugarcane and grow sugarcane. And it's like they really don't, it's not part of what they think about every day.
You know what, as a Durbanite, I love my Indian brethren, to be honest, because I've learned a lot from how they really hustle and they really make things work despite adversity. That's why when I started working and I interacted more with Indians, that's when I started waking up to the fact that, wait a minute, these guys, even though they suffered, they're like, we don't care, we still proceed. But with black people, it's like we need a white person to give us permission.
I mean, we're both making generalizations now. I'm sure that there are some.
No, it's general. Yeah, you're right. It's not based on the factual stuff.
It's like if I took all the opinions on Twitter for Black Lives Matter, you wouldn't feature at all.
Yeah, at all. Because, and here's the thing. Okay, this is one thing that I've noticed. Also, is that people always expect that black people need to feel the same. Now, that is what really makes me quite upset in the sense of.
Isn't that in itself is like racism? Because all blacks think the same way. Like, if you said that about Gareth, you whites, I'd be like, fuck you. I'm not like one of those whites who thinks X, Y, or Z. I like to think of myself as an individual. I'd find it very insulting. And similarly, there are lots of black people who just don't like this idea that if they don't conform to the majority idea, especially in South Africa, there's like, someone calls you clever black or coconut or Uncle Tom in America. These are very, very pejorative things that people say. It's almost like they're trying to exclude you from your birthright.
Yeah, and they do that on purpose, obviously, to go tear down the fact that you are actually a success, because usually those terms are reserved for black people who are actually quite successful. And as we know, people who are successful act in a particular way, and it's not about race. To me, I've always said this: it's about class. It's about basically the super elite versus the not so super elite. And in that sense, people need to realize that, because with the black narrative, the real issues are family. We have a very bad system of family units where children grow up without fathers and mothers, or both. And what happens there is, psychologically speaking, you're breeding a child, especially young black men. I'm gonna be more hard on my fellow black men in the sense of they would be the cause of our black sisters' misery, who in turn, the cycle goes on. Because if you think
I saw the news yesterday about gender-based violence, and there's this Tsegofatso story which is all over the news, which again people are justifiably pissed off about. But I don't think we can look at everything and this is where you're going to get irritated with me now, Nqobile, but I know lots of people who are into the narrative, and they say to me, yeah, but there is a historical role there's a historical part of this that has played a major role in how black families were affected in America by welfare, in South Africa by the migrant labor system. So it's complicated, and we're not going to solve it in one show. But I just wanted to give you a couple of minutes to air your views, because I know you've got lots to say on this. We're going to have to cut this short, though, I'm afraid.
No problem, guys.
Sorry,
But yeah, thanks, man.